welcome to Asian Times TV. We have with us today a very special guest. Professor Sudhir Kakar is joining us from Goa, India. We'll be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, starting off with women's issues, violence against women in India. We're going to be talking about the Indian rape case, which is now in the courts. You may recall on December 16th, the 22-year-old medical student was gang raped in Delhi. So we're going to start off from there. Professor Kakar, tell us, what do you think is going on in Indian society currently that's creating this epidemic of violence against women?
Dinesh, there isn't really an epidemic of violence which is new. The violence against women has always been there. It is only the explosion in the new media, lots of television channels, the print media, where that violence comes out.
I see.
And it also comes out because in the cities and the towns, there's a whole set of, whole group of emancipated, empowered women who take these issues out and bring it to the public notice.
I see. So is it partly a function of the fact that clearly India is liberalizing, modernizing? Now 20 years after liberalization, more men from rural areas are moving into the cities and they're not used to modern, independent, economically earned, gainfully employed women who obviously want to be out in the evening.
Yeah, very much so. Because you see, there's no such category as a woman in India. That is really very much a Western category. In India, there is a woman is either a daughter, a sister, a mother, grandmother, aunt, only relationships. So and it depends on the violence is not against all kind of women. I mean, certainly not against older women, certainly not against young girls that much, but only a certain class, which is young women. So I would say the women in 20s, late teens, that is where the violence is the most widespread.
I see. And why do you think that is? It's because obviously these women are coming of age. Is that right?
They are coming of age, and they are looked upon as, since they are people who come from the villages, who cannot place these new young women into their old categories. She's not really looks like my sister. She doesn't look like my cousin. So who is she? So she becomes then really a woman's body rather than a woman.
I see. So when you say there is no category of a woman, as in the independent woman in India, is that a function of the fact that India never had a what you may call women's liberalization or women's lib movement?
Yeah, very much so. There was no women's liberal. It still is very, very limited to the. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can hear you.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
All right.
And we can see you as well. I think.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead. So you were saying that it's still limited. The women's movement is still limited in India.
It's still very much limited to the big cities and to the middle class. It's growing, but it's still very, very much limited. And they, of course, take the Western categories of women, and very much they're quite right, because I think that is one of the big things which we have to accept, that a woman is not only a woman, a person who is in relationships, but who is also can be without relationships, also a person.
Got it. So Carrie Adams, who's my co-host today, who has a show on Princeton TV about women's empowerment and women's body images, she's going to be co-hosting the show. So Carrie,
well, I want to ask Dr. Kakar. Hi, Dr. Kakar.
Hi, Ken.
When these attacks happen there on these women, does a lot of the blame, or does all the blame go onto her, and they don't really go after and prosecute the violators?
They are, of course, going to prosecute the violators very much so, because there was a huge outcry.
Right.
But in the reaction, you see how divided the Indian society is still between people who are still very much in the tradition and people who look at women as individual and persons and not only in relationships. So the people who are very much traditional, conservative, they think a woman who becomes completely independent, goes around without any kind of a mark of relationship on her, she is inviting some such things.
Right, and so that's the message, especially with liberalization of women there, that if they start dressing a little bit more casually or more, showing a little more skin, that they're kind of inviting it.
They're kind of inviting it.
Yeah.
That's the conservative society, and there is still a lot of them today, and that's why there were so many reactions also from that side, that women then invite it that way. And it's not really India. I mean, that is India, of course, is very much in the news that time. But this is you see you hear in the United States from very fundamentalist groups and everywhere else. It is the same thing, that women who dress what they say so-called provocatively invited.
Yep.
But when the Indian rape case happened, some communication was going on back and forth in the press about another incident that happened in Steubenville, Ohio, where a young teenage girl, 16-year-old girl was also assaulted.
Allegedly raped.
Yeah, so Carrie, what is the update on that?
Well, the update, yesterday I discovered that they had 40 witnesses that were subpoenaed. So there are a lot of, it's a very public attack, supposedly, and it makes you wonder, because these young idiots actually recorded it and put it on YouTube, how many cases like these go unnoticed. I think here in the U.S. we tend to hide a lot of these cases that, here it's a lot of times these small town football heroes that you hear about allegedly raping and attacking women. So it's different, but I think there's a similar message too, that there's a power issue with men and women.
Right, so you were telling me earlier that in the American case you had football players, right? Stars who are star quarterbacks who feel licensed to take advantage of young women.
Tends to be the case.
Stupidly. I don't know if that's a word, but
stupidly.
Definitely. So what do you think about the cross-cultural angle here? Is there one?
Well, there is, I think, first the universal angle, I think, which Carrie quite rightly said. I mean, in the UK, 85% this is what I read, of reported sexual assault and rapes also go unreported because the women don't come to report that. So it's not something which is not universal. In India, it is, I think, even more. The confidence or the trust in the law authorities is much less. And of course, also the shame, which is associated with that, is much more. But it is not really that different. I mean, I was reading it. Berlin, with 1/5 of Delhi's population, has the same number of reported rapes.
I see.
So it's something. I was really surprised at the very strong reactions in the Western press to this particular rape. I was not so surprised in India because I think it was overdue. We need those very strong reactions, which happened in India, which has really changed a lot. They are going fast courts are being set up. All these rapists are this day-to-day trial is going to happen, and that's going to be very soon punished also. And I think that's a very good thing. It was a very good wake-up call.
Why were you surprised by the strong Western reaction in the media here?
Because I was surprised because it's the same as I said, Berlin is 1/5 the population. New York. I mean, New York has 2,800 reported rapes a year. Delhi has 650. Populations almost the same. And of course, now one thing is, Delhi, the unreported rapes may be much higher. That I'm quite willing to admit.
Absolutely. And you said earlier, before we started taping, are you there?
An Indian.
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. Kakar, you said something interesting before we started taping, that this is nothing new. Rape has been here. It's all these cases, are just really getting more coverage in the media. And I know that gender violence is the #1 human rights abuses that there is. And I heard an interesting study that said that more women globally will die from an attack by a man than from cancer or car accidents.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And that's not surprising to you?
No, that's not surprising.
Wow.
No.
Yeah. No. Interesting.
So at the time, Dipankar Gupta and Ashish Nandi, wrote a piece in India Today and said that the Delhi gang rape was an expression of the mental sickness spawned by the widening chasm between the aspiring have less and the flaunting have more. So they were almost making a economic, neo-Marxist argument about development, and this is what it's brought us.
I really wouldn't. I wouldn't fully subscribe to that. I think it is true that the people who come into the cities, the young migrants from villages, who then see all the wealth which is being flaunted, and the women who are the independent liberal belong to the higher class with more wealth, that there can be some of the, let's say, the envy and the frustration which can be directed against them. But I would say it really is much more that these men are free from the traditional, I would say not the sanctions, but the traditional morality. And in the village, everyone they wouldn't be able to do that at all, because everyone knows everyone. It would be a huge shame on them and their families. Here, they are also free of their families. There is no one to check them. So and they kind of feel as if they are free to do or indulge in these kind of things.
Right. So, I think the other point that we need to bring out here is, of course, the women's roles in India, obviously, and the strength that women have in the domestic sphere and even in politics, right?
Yeah.
And in public offices. India clearly has a lot more women who have a lot of power in the public sphere, unlike the West, well, the United States in particular, which is where the discordance sort of takes place. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, well, that is a very interesting part because, of course, there have been women leaders, prime ministers, etc. But then one always said, no, these are the ones who kind of inherited from their fathers or their husbands, which is true. What happened in Sri Lanka, in Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan, Indira Gandhi in India. But now, of course, you see women who are completely so-to-called self-made women and who also come from the very lower caste. Now, Mayawati, the chief minister of the biggest state in India, about 100 million, more than that, 100 million people, the biggest state, she is a lower caste woman who's completely self-made. Then there is Tamil Nadu, one of the biggest states, Jayalalitha, Bengal, Mamata Banerjee, and these have no husbands, brothers, etc. So there is really no check on women taking leadership positions. There is no thing that there is a glass ceiling about that. So that's much, much more in India, and that is a discordant thing. But then again, you will see how people address them. They are immediately turned into, Mamata is called Didi, which means an elder sister.
Right.
Jayalalitha is called Amma, which means mother.
Right.
Mayawati is called Bain, which means sister. So they are immediately given the honorifics of relationship.
Right.
So they are not just Mamata, they are not just independent women.
Right.
So to make them more familiar that they are not these kind of women.
Now, the feminists in the West and in the U.S. in particular, attacked Western media for casting aspersions on India using a Western framework, or calling it basically neo-colonial framework to understand sexuality in India. That the West has always done this, and the feminist literature is trying to correct this bias or error, which historically has been there. And can you comment on that aspect of the relationship? How much of the Western lens is being used here to understand sexuality in India, and to kind of see it through the savage lens of the anthropologist?
Well, in my view, there is a very much a Western lens on what is the individual body. And it seems to me, in much of in Western media, television, movies, shows, etc., that it is a kind of accepted thing that a body is an area of enjoyment. Now, this is not what the Indian traditional view of the body is. The body is not just an area of enjoyment. It is looked upon as, it has, to use the word somehow sacred, that you cannot do with the body just as to anything which you like, which is seen as freedom in the West, that the body should be absolutely belongs to the individual, can use it as much or as often or as well or as badly as he thinks. This is not the case in India, where the body is not seen as an area of enjoyment, but something, well, I can only say the word of a sacred, the seat of procreation, which is hugely important, so that it should be treated with much more respect by others and by the person themselves.
I see. So conservative view of the body, right? Almost like a right-wing Christian conservative view of the body, where it's really for procreation,
Yeah,
where
practical
abortion is where
purposes.
abortion is illegal, well, abortion is not sanctioned.
Right.
Right.
But
So
Dr.
what is your
Kakar,
question on that?
Well, I want to know why the anger, like with this recent attack on December 16th. Why it was such a violent attack? Why the anger there? You know, how many men were there that attacked her?
7.
7 men attacking her and raping her, and to the point that she dies.
Yeah.
Why the anger?
Now, this is something which will only come out, I think, in the court proceedings of what happened. Did this? I mean, one thing, of course, they are saying now, of course, that they were all drunk. I mean, but that is no excuse.
And it clearly
But,
wasn't for sex, which most rape cases aren't. You know,
Right.
but it seemed there was a motive behind it, an issue, an underlying issue in the community. Correct?
Yeah. Now, what exactly I mean, I wouldn't really be able to comment it of this, because that has really made this much more virulent in all the media, etc. It was not just violence; it was savagery.
Yeah.
And why that? Because of course, rape is always associated with violence. There is violence there, but that kind of violence, what led to that? That is something which I think it would be presumptuous of me to kind of give an off-the-cuff answer to that of what happened to why that kind of violence.
Yeah, it just goes to show that the differences in our communities, our societies. You know, here, our rape cases aren't. You know, they're violent and they're abusive, but they're very different. You know, it's not something of that savage.
Right.
You know,
And the laws in the United States, of course, are stricter as well.
Yeah. But that's also the same thing, I think, in India, because otherwise it wouldn't have created such a big storm as it did, was this kind of violence, because that kind of savagery and violence has been unprecedented.
No, but you said at the time when I interviewed you, you said, yes, the perversion of the West has creeped into the Indian society and psyche. And by perversion, you mean certain use of the body repetitively for certain pleasures that becomes... can you explain what you mean by perversion then, in the Freudian sense, or do you mean something more?
No, I don't mean it in the Freudian sense. I mean it in the perversion of that the whole idea of what sexuality all about is, that sexuality has become as if it is food and eating. I mean, that it is much more again, one would say it is whether it's a Christian right or the conservative here, and this has been a conservative society, that sexuality is something much more important, and not only just pleasure, and not just only to be used as you see fit, but something to be respected. I mean, it is really the fire of creation. So that kind of imagery is associated with sexuality, and that is the perversion of the West, that sexuality, which becomes just like a snack to be eaten, loses in fact all its charm. Also, it loses its eroticism. There's no erotic part there left anymore.
So I think you said in another piece at the time that it's become almost like going to the amusement park. You know, perversion as in the using the body for what
candy shop.
Right. So is that the Western notion of?
I don't know. I mean, this is a long time argument that's been had, I think, in the media. You know, we're sexual beings, but we're just more open here, I think.
Right.
But we're not as open as Europe, so you know, I don't know.
But the rape cases, I think you were telling me in detail, were in the United States that happen is invariably you have a star athlete or a quarterback or somebody who's seen as a macho hero or whatever,
Oh, we have date rape cases.
who takes advantage of, or preys upon
Yeah.
a young woman.
A woman, a lot of times inebriated and doesn't have her faculties about her. Yeah. But they say the same thing happened with the Indian. I mean, there's so many similarities and differences. We could go on and on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you're quite right about all being sexual beings, but is there any meaning to be attached to sexuality, or is it, just a need among many, or is it more than a need? Is it something more than a need? So that is a difference which is still very much being played out in India. In West, of course, there are specialized professions which exist for the satisfaction of any sexual need, whether sadomaso, any kind of things, and small niches which anything goes.
Right.
This anything goes is still not an acceptable part in the Indian society.
Right, exactly. So I think what you're saying in India, what seemed to have surfaced is the savagery, either from repressed needs or from friction caused by social change in urban areas, rural, urban, sort of the peri-urban areas. And these young men, some of them, I think one of them was underage, don't have the psychological makeup or the kind of the maturation, if you will, to be able to deal with this kind of stimulus or stimulation that's coming at them.
That's right. And the stimulation comes from the movies, from all kind of ways, from advertisements. And these young men, of course, feel that they are frustrated. They feel they are missing out on something which all the others have, which is not true, of course.
Right.
But
Right.
How do we get away from that age-old problem of blaming the victim, blaming the woman for dressing provocatively or more modern? How do we find that?
So I guess that's the other question, right? So the women's movement, which has not had a sort of a movement, in the Western sense of the term, the liberal movement, is it now coalesced to form something more of a, groundswell of a movement for women's rights?
Again, I don't think there's one movement there. There's in the women movement, there are all shades of opinion. I think, like in all women's movements, also in India, for instance, one would be seen as the extreme of that so-called that slut walk which happened in Delhi. I think it came from the West also, the idea,
right?
The slut walk, and that, of course, would be seen as a huge provocation by even others who would support it. I mean, why do you have to go to that kind of extremes? So I think the acceptance of extremes of women's movement is still very, very low in India. And these are the ones which come in only in the big cities.
Right. No, the slut walk was a global thing. It happened in major cities, and it was organized in India as well, where women came out and said, we can dress however we want, and we will not be preyed upon. That was the idea.
Yeah, I like it. I don't like the title of it, but I like the concept.
Well, they wanted to be provocative.
Yeah,
I think,
sure.
to use the
Push
term.
some buttons.
Yeah. So now, in terms of Bollywood, right, there was some criticism leveled at Bollywood, obviously, in the last decade or so, post-liberalization. Movies are borrowing Western scripts, whether it's a murder, an affair, extramarital sex, and what have you, that the Western scripts and the borrowing of Western scripts seems to be happening quite frequently. And so can you comment on that in terms of the big production money that goes into creating these, narratives, which also partly fuel this new sensibility among men?
There's a lot of borrowing of scripts taking place. The movies have changed, but again, where the protests, of course, happen about the Bollywood movies is that making women's body, the objectifying of women's bodies.
I see.
That has become much, much more so-called item numbers. Those dance where a woman is, half clad, very scantily clad, gyrating, moving all her bodily parts.
But you also have Western women now, right? The importation of Western dancers and women who earlier were seen as foreign kind of women are now part and parcel of, the Bollywood script.
Western women were always seen as from the Western side, sexually liberated, and from the Indian viewpoint of sexually available. this was always looked upon as that the West is the so-called something like the war house.
Yeah.
Where everything happens. I mean, this is the normal idea in a conservative society.
Mm-hmm.
So that is then they provide the titillation part of it, and the movies have changed. But if you look at the movies, which I was looking, because I'm on one of the so-called the Academy Awards, which I'm going to look at, and I was looking at 14, 15 of last year's movies.
Mm-hmm.
There is that the woman, the heroine, who is now much more liberated, will be also dressed in skirts, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Starts changing, and when at the end of it, when you look at her dress, she has again become a traditional kind of a woman. Although she's a doctor, etc., she starts cooking for the man. So they're trying to make a combination of the traditional and the modern woman.
Mm-hmm.
So both woman who's sexy but still Indian. So that is what is being happening. So it's not completely going the Western way.
Yeah, so I saw you were on a panel with Priyanka Chopra, who's the big
Right.
star, femme fatale in India now. And she said, I think you were at the panel at the time, she said, now if I want to walk naked on the street, it doesn't give the man any justification and right to approach me and assault me.
That's right.
So, but I didn't catch the part in terms of what did you say to that? Because Shabana Azmi was also on the panel, and she said, "Well, we have lots of studies that this provokes men." What did you say? What was your comment?
My comment was that she's right, that it doesn't give any man the right to do that. But she should look at what her rights are. Why would she want to do that first? Walk naked on the street.
Right. So, but she's obviously trying to be provocative,
Yeah,
and
that's a good
she's
point.
saying that she's a liberal woman, that she can do what she pleases.
Yeah,
Is that what she's saying?
That is the narrative of individualism. You see,
Okay.
and in India is still not an individual society. Individual is not the center of the social contract, social relation. It is still the group, family, community, which is the center, and not individual. And this individual part, of course, she's very much right. If you see that individual is the center of any kind of social and political order, but if you look that it is the community or the group, then of course it becomes very different, because then the individual rights are constrained by the context in which the individual is, the group or the community. So that is a very big, which is a conflict which is taking place in India at the moment.
So you see clearly the urban areas are changing in terms of sexual mores, women dating, love marriages, potentially.
Not really that much as the media puts out, for very good reasons also. Because the marriages, if you look at all the surveys, India today has a survey of sexuality since last 10 years. For young people in cities, town, the preference for arranged marriages is increasing rather than decreasing, both in cities and in towns.
But
So
they're having more premarital sex though, right? According to the India Today survey.
they are having more premarital sex, true enough, but that premarital sex is still very much hidden. It is not flaunted at all, or it can't be.
And it's both men and women, right, who are participating.
Both men and women, but of course women have come out, because the men always used to have premarital sex with the prostitutes or were available, but that is no longer. Now women also are coming out, but it is not that open, and for very good reason. And the reason is because if the marriages are arranged, that means your family's reputation becomes extremely important. So if in my family reputation becomes that my sister has been what they call is being whorish or slut, it will affect not only her marriage, but will affect the marriage of her brothers, her sisters, etc., who won't be able to find mates. So it still has to be very much hidden. It is not an open, accepted kind of a thing.
I see. So while India is changing, but it's changing very gradually.
Yeah.
So these are some of the differences I guess we wanted to get into. So thank you for sharing this time with us.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll love to have you back.
All right. Okay.
Thanks so
you.
much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us at Asia Times TV. Join us again next week for another interesting edition of Asian Times. Okay, thank you.